Never allow narcissistic abuse to sabotage your own happiness. It's easier said than done, especially if you haven't experienced it yourself. When someone has spent years being controlled, criticized, and made to feel unworthy, they start believing they don't deserve happiness at all. Even when the narcissist is gone, that inner voice of doubt lingers. It makes them push away good things or settle for less than they deserve. Today, we'll talk about the ways narcissistic abuse victims sabotage their own happiness. Are you ready for number 1? Self-doubt. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm just overreacting? Are these thoughts sound familiar? Narcissistic abuse has a sneaky way of making you doubt yourself at every turn. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse, explains, gaslighting is not just about making you question reality. It's about making you question yourself. Over time, you internalize this doubt, making it nearly impossible to trust your own choices. This self-doubt doesn't just stay in your head. It spills into every aspect of your life. You hesitate before making decisions, avoid taking risks, and constantly seek validation from others. Author Shahida Arabi, who writes extensively on healing from narcissistic abuse, describes it perfectly. Survivors often become their own worst enemy, doubting their worth and their intuition because they've been trained to believe they are inherently flawed. The key to breaking free is rebuilding self-trust, one small decision at a time. Start by celebrating every choice you make, no matter how small. Remind yourself that your voice, your feelings, and your instincts do matter. Let's talk about number 2, becoming people-repellent. Do you keep pushing people away, even when you don't want to be alone? If so, you're not crazy. You're protecting yourself. If you've experienced narcissistic abuse, your brain becomes wired for survival, not connection. You've been burned before, so now you assume that everyone will eventually hurt or abandon you. Dr. Lindsay Gibson, author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, explains, people who have been emotionally wounded often build walls instead of bridges, mistaking isolation for safety. You convince yourself that keeping your distance is the best way to avoid pain. However, in reality, it just reinforces loneliness. You cancel plans, avoid deep conversations, or convince yourself that others don't truly care. But here's the truth. Not everyone is out to break you. Healing starts when you take small steps to let the right people in. One honest conversation, one moment of trust at a time. The right people won't see your scars as baggage. They'll see them as proof of your strength. Let's move on to number 3. Avoiding self-care. When was the last time you did something just for yourself without feeling guilty? If you had to think about it, that's a red flag. Narcissistic abuse trains you to believe that your needs don't matter. You get so used to walking on eggshells and making sure everyone else is okay that you forget about yourself. Psychologist Dr. Sherry Campbell explains in her book, But It's Your Family, that victims of emotional abuse often equate self-care with selfishness because they were conditioned to serve others at their own expense. Over time, this mindset leaves you drained, while convincing yourself that rest, good food, and exercise are luxuries instead of necessities. But the truth is, neglecting yourself doesn't make you a better person. It just makes you exhausted, sick, and more vulnerable to emotional triggers. Self-care isn't selfish. It's survival. Start small. Drink water, eat a real meal, and take a deep breath. Little by little, you'll teach yourself that your well-being matters. And when you believe that, happiness stops feeling like a distant dream and starts becoming your new reality. You shouldn't miss number 4. Setting unrealistic expectations. Do you feel like you're always falling short no matter what you do? If you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, you've probably been conditioned to feel like you're never enough. They make you believe that no matter how hard you try, it's not good enough for them. Over time, this gets internalized, and you start setting these ridiculously high standards for yourself. You expect perfection in everything you do. Dr. Stephanie Sarkis explains in her book, Gaslighting, recognize manipulative and emotionally abusive people, that victims of narcissistic abuse learn to perform in a way that's designed to avoid criticism and earn approval, rather than being true to themselves. The real issue is that these unrealistic expectations create a constant cycle of disappointment and frustration. When you expect so much of yourself or others, you're just setting yourself up for failure. So, the key is learning to set more realistic, compassionate expectations, not based on what others want, but on what's achievable. Start by acknowledging that you're human, and human beings make mistakes. That's not a weakness, that's growth. Are you still up for number 5? Seeking constant approval. Do you feel like you need everyone's approval to feel okay? It's exhausting, isn't it? After narcissistic abuse, you're conditioned to believe that your worth is determined by how others see you, especially when your abuser constantly reinforces this idea. You may find yourself always seeking praise or trying to please people to feel good about yourself. Dr. Rick Hanson, a psychologist and author of Hardwiring Happiness, explains that our brains are wired to seek approval because it helps us feel safe. However, relying on external validation for happiness keeps us on an endless treadmill of dissatisfaction. The truth is, seeking approval from others is like trying to fill a bucket with holes in it. It's a never-ending cycle. You might even catch yourself changing who you are just to get people to like you. But the only way to break free is to start validating yourself. You have to shift your focus from looking for approval to creating your sense of value. Start by recognizing your strengths, embracing your flaws, and, most importantly, reminding yourself that you are enough, just as you are. Let's keep it moving to number 6. Ruminating on the past. Do you often find yourself replaying old arguments or moments from the past? Narcissistic abuse often traps you in this mental loop of overthinking. Your brain keeps replaying everything that went wrong, making you recall your mistakes and what you could have done differently. Dr. Daniel Amen, a psychiatrist and author of Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, explains that ruminating is like driving with the brakes on. You can't move forward if you keep looking in the rearview mirror. This cycle of overthinking holds you hostage in the past, and it prevents you from living in the present or planning for a healthier future. The truth is, ruminating doesn't change anything. It only keeps you stuck. To break free, you have to train your mind to redirect that energy into the present moment. This doesn't mean forgetting the past, but it does mean choosing not to let it dictate your life today. Start by focusing on what you can control in the here and now, whether it's your thoughts, actions, or the boundaries you set. The more you practice, the easier it will become to release the grip of those old memories and start living with intention. Here comes number 7, engaging in self-destructive habits. It's common for victims of narcissistic abuse to fall into harmful coping mechanisms. After enduring emotional or psychological trauma, it can feel like the only way to cope with the pain is to numb it. You might turn to substances, overeat, or even engage in risky behavior just to stop feeling the overwhelming emotions that come with your past. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a trauma expert and author of The Body Keeps the Score, explains that trauma disconnects you from your sense of self, and people often turn to substances or behaviors to fill that void. Unfortunately, these habits only offer temporary relief and often make the pain worse in the long run. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that these habits will help you escape your pain, but they end up keeping you stuck in a cycle of self-destruction. The key to breaking this cycle is learning healthier ways to cope, like finding emotional outlets through therapy, exercise, or creative expression. You are not defined by your past or the coping mechanisms you've used. There is always room for change and growth. Moving on to number 8, suppressing anger. After narcissistic abuse, you might bottle up your anger and frustration just to keep the peace. But when you constantly suppress your feelings, it doesn't make them go away. It only causes them to build up inside you, leading to resentment, anxiety, and even depression. The danger of not expressing anger is that it keeps you stuck in a cycle of emotional suppression, as Dr. Harriet Lerner explains in her book, The Dance of Anger. Anger is a powerful emotion that signals something is wrong in our lives, but when we don't express it, we miss the opportunity to change and heal. Suppressing your anger also means you're not standing up for your own needs or boundaries. Instead of letting those feelings fester, it's important to find constructive ways to express anger. You might want to try therapy, journaling, or having a candid conversation with someone you trust. Let's continue to number 9. Perpetuating self-criticism. It's no surprise if you consider yourself as your number 1 critic, especially after experiencing narcissistic abuse. The constant negative self-talk and harsh self-judgment you've internalized from the abuser can be paralyzing. You might believe that you're not deserving of happiness, success, or even love. This voice of criticism becomes so loud and persistent that you start to accept it as truth, when it's just a distorted reflection of your real worth. The problem with perpetuating self-criticism is that it keeps you stuck in a negative cycle. Every mistake or setback gets magnified, and instead of learning and growing from them, you're left feeling worthless. As Dr. Mark Williams, a professor of clinical psychology, explains, self-criticism often traps you in the past, making it hard to move forward or embrace your full potential. To break this pattern, you need to start practicing self-compassion. This means being kind to yourself, recognizing that you're not perfect, but still worthy of happiness and love. Finally, we're down to number 10, disengaging from hobbies or passions. Have you ever given up something you love just because someone else said it didn't matter? Narcissistic abuse makes you feel like your hobbies don't matter, or that you're selfish for enjoying them. Over time, you start to believe that part of yourself isn't worth nurturing. As Dr. Richard Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems Therapy, puts it, when we give up the things that make us feel alive, we lose pieces of ourselves. You're gradually disconnecting from your true self, and that loss leaves a void. What happens when you stop engaging in activities you love is that you feel more disconnected from your sense of self-worth. Without those outlets, the emotional toll of narcissistic abuse can feel even heavier. It's important to remember that your passions matter, and taking time for them isn't selfish. It's a vital part of maintaining your well-being. Reclaiming those hobbies can be a powerful step in reconnecting with yourself, healing, and rediscovering the happiness that's always been yours to reclaim. Breaking free from narcissistic abuse isn't just about leaving the person. It's about unlearning the habits that keep you stuck in pain. Happiness might feel unfamiliar or even scary at first, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve it. The key is recognizing when you're standing in your own way and reminding yourself that you're allowed to heal, grow, and enjoy life. Every time you choose self-care, set a boundary, or embrace something good without guilt, you take back your power. You've been through enough. Don't let the past steal the happiness that's meant for you.